Tenure. Reggie, Tenure.
It's going to be very exciting. So you're going to love this one. Dr. Pepper. How are you doing?
I'm good. Yourself?
I'm good. Great. So, you know, Ray, Judy's back now. And I said, oh man, we've had so much fun, Judy. And here's what I haven't done. Here we go. No, it's been great to be back on campus. I've enjoyed it. Had, you know, a lot of new people to meet upstairs as usual. But so far, I like all of them.
At least I'm next to Dr. Johnson, so I can walk over on his side. He's slower.
So, this is.
If I stayed there for between 2 minutes, you're big like me.
Other than that, you can sit where you want, or if there's.
Where I know tenured people sat before.
Do that. Do that. So, yeah, it's been good. It's been good. Didn't schedule a meeting with you.
Yeah, I'm upstairs at 1 o'clock.
Gotcha. Exciting and everything. Controls and short.
Good morning. Our first song this morning is "The Lord is My Light." The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? And He is my strength, the defense of my life. Whom shall I fear? Have mercy, O Lord, and answer my cry. Turn not away, for Thou art my help, the God of salvation. Turn not away. Wait, oh wait on the Lord. Be strong and take courage. Wait on the Lord. Wait, oh wait on the Lord. Be strong and take courage. Yes, wait on the Lord. Oh Lord, lead me now in Thy path straight and even. Teach me Thy way. I will not despair. Thy goodness sustains me. Teach me Thy way. To dwell in His house all the days of my life. This shall I see, and know to behold the Lord in His beauty. This shall I see. Wait, oh wait on the Lord. Be strong and take courage. Wait on the Lord. Wait, oh wait on the Lord. Be strong and take courage. Yes, wait on the Lord.
Our chapel speaker yesterday started us off this week by talking about Genesis chapter 3. And it is, of course, that narrative that is central to how we need to understand our lives. Living in a world of sin, we are consumed from the beginning of our decision, the same way that Eve made her decision to rebel against God. And in that, we lay on ourselves shame and judgment. And then the central question of our lives of redemption is, what do we do with that shame? I typically at Livingston get the opportunity to teach the 16, 17, 18-year-olds in Bible class. Get to have a lot of great back and forth, good questions. This semester, my wife and I have been tasked with teaching the 10-year-olds. We have a group of 10-year-old boys and 3 very tomboyish little girls, one of which is mine, and those children will eat you alive. But there is something about the insight and naivete of 10-year-olds and their reactions to stories when you tell them that give you insight you've never had before. I have, in many instances, over the course of my lifetime, had the opportunity to teach the story of David, the life of David, particularly in 1 Samuel. We're doing 1 Samuel with the 10-year-olds, and I've seen some things that I've never seen before. And so this week, I want to talk to you about the role of shame and fear in the life of Saul and his family. In 1 Samuel chapter 15, we are introduced to the battle with the Amalekites. God has tasked Saul with utterly destroying this pagan nation, including their women and their children and their livestock. But when Samuel arrives, he catches Saul surrounded by the best of the sheep and the flocks and keeping company with King Agag. I don't know what Saul was thinking, but I can only imagine that it must have served his ego to keep this pagan king as a slave or as a trophy after having won this great victory. But Samuel calls him to task on that and humiliates Saul by telling him, "You are rebellious, and you have not done what God has asked you to do, and he is stripping the kingdom away from you." Saul makes excuses, and then at the last, he begs Samuel, "I'm sorry, but please honor me in front of the people." He's humiliated. And this, for Saul, is the cusp of his life, the point at which he needs to make his decision about what he's going to do with his shame and humiliation. And I don't want to give away the end of the story, but here's the tragic irony of it. The future king was his son-in-law. He was Jonathan's best friend and had a covenant with him so that Jonathan would have been his central advisor. Later on, when Jonathan confronts Saul and says, "David is one of your biggest supporters, and I will have a place in his household," Saul, in defiance of God's willingness and desire to preserve his family, even after having stripped the kingdom away from him, Saul doubles down on shame and humiliation. He is eaten up by fear and his own shame. He doesn't take the David course. David, later on in his life, when confronted with his shame, in the story of Bathsheba, you remember? Though he kept that secret for nearly a year, when finally confronted with it, repented, as it were, in dust and ashes. And God restores to him his fortunes, although there are to be consequences in his life. But despite the consequences, Solomon came out of that union with Bathsheba. And the glory of the United Kingdom was realized in that son because David subjected himself to God's mechanisms for eliminating shame in our life. But Saul doesn't take that course. He lies about David, his biggest supporter. Remember the one who comforted him with his harp, the one who defeated Goliath, his greatest captain, the one who made a covenant with his son, who would refuse later in his life, given the opportunities, not to harm Saul, who was in secret, while being chased by Saul and betrayed by those he was protecting, would defend the outskirts of Israel for nearly a decade in infamy while having lies told about him. This is what David says about those lies and slanders that are told about him in Psalm 52, verse 2. He writes about this and says of these men speaking lies about him, "Your tongue devises destruction like a sharp razor, O worker of deceit." In Psalm 59, "Behold, they have set an ambush for my life. Fierce men launch an attack against me. Not for my transgression, nor for my sin, O Lord, for no guilt of mine. They run and set themselves against me. Arouse yourself to help me and see." Instead of accepting his shame and humiliation and letting God deal with it, Saul slanders David. In 1 Samuel chapter 24, after the cave at En-Gedi, when David had an opportunity to humiliate and destroy Saul, Saul leaves and David cries down to him, "Why do you listen to the words of men saying, 'Behold, David seeks to harm you'?" And that scapegoating of his shame onto David that Saul does, you can hear it echoed in the words of those whom David protects. The shepherds in the wilderness of Ziph who turned him in, the inhabitants of the city of Keilah whom David protected, who would have turned him in, but David finds out about it because he inquires of the Lord. You can hear it in the accusations of the foolish Nabal. David is protecting Nabal's flocks in the wilderness. And he goes and asks Nabal for help for his men. And what does Nabal say? "Who is David and who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants today who are each breaking away from his master." He's parroting that accusation of Saul and his men against David. And that Saul's shame and humiliation that Saul refuses to accept as his own, he casts on David. You can see fear and shame throughout the life of Saul and in the life of his family. You see it in 1 Samuel chapter 10, when Saul is hiding among the baggage, an indicator of his core weakness, fear, and an inability to see himself as God sees him, as a man who could be capable of doing great things. You can hear it later on in David's life in the accusations of Michal. Remember his wife that gets given to somebody else, and then there seems to be a partial reconciliation. And then David finds himself in his triumph going out, takes off his outer robes, and dances among the people in worship of God. Michal sees that and says, "How dare you go out?" She says, "Go out and be naked in front of the people." He's not naked. He's wearing his tunic. He's taken off his robe, the symbol of his royalty. He's prancing with the commoners. And she casts shame on him for that, for worshiping God and fellowshipping with his people. You see it again in Saul's accusations to Jonathan in 1 Samuel chapter 20, when Jonathan confronts him about what's going on with David, and he says, "Dad, don't you know that David's on my side and that our family's going to be preserved?" And what is Saul's maddening response? "You son of a perverse, rebellious woman, do I not know that you're choosing the son of Jesse to your own shame and the shame of your mother's nakedness? For as long as the son of Jesse lives on the earth, neither you nor your kingdom will be established. Therefore now send and bring him to me, for he must surely die." Rather than taking responsibilities for his sins, he's casting shame on Jonathan, the greatest hero Israel ever knew, and on Jonathan's mother, who's not even there to defend herself. When he says, "To the shame of your mother's nakedness," Saul is essentially saying to Jonathan, "You have no respect for me or your mother. You're dishonoring the family." And the irony, of course, is that Saul is insulting his own wife in this slur. It shows Saul's estrangement both from his wife and his son, whom he sees as perfidious. And it indicates that Saul is at this point completely losing it. He's become paranoid. This exchange between him and Jonathan is poignant and tragic. And the great irony of not confronting his own shame is this: God seeks to set us free from all of that. He would have saved Saul's family. He would have preserved Jonathan's family in the kingdom of David. But Saul chose not to accept it, and not to accept God's grace and punishment, which would have been better than Saul's plans for himself and the results that he received. We'll talk more on Wednesday and Thursday about how not to deal with shame in other people's life and what God's answer for our shame and humiliation is on Thursday. Would you pray with me? Righteous Father, set us free from shame and sin and death. We know that you intend us to be full of love and courage and hope, not fear and desperation. And we cast our shame and our cares on Jesus, your Son, and in his name we ask this prayer. Amen.
You are my strength. Know me, you are my strength. You are my shield. You are my help, my healer. You are my rock. You are my rock. You are my shield. You are my help, my healer. You are my help, my healer. You are my rock. You are my shield. You are my healer. You are my rock. You are my shield. You are my help, my healer. You are my rock. You are my shield. You are my help, my healer. You are my rock. You are my shield. You are my help, my healer. You are my rock. You are my shield. You are my help, my healer. You are my rock. You are my shield. You are my help, my healer. You are my rock. You are my shield. You are my help, my healer. You are my rock. You are my shield. You are my help, my healer. You are my rock. You are my shield. You are my help, my healer. You are my rock. You are my shield. You are my help, my healer. You are my rock. You are my shield. You are my help, my healer. You are my rock. You are my shield. You are my help, my healer. You are my rock. You are my shield. You are my help, my healer. You are my rock. You are my shield. You are my help, my healer. You are my rock. You are my shield. You are my help, my healer. You are my
the end of our announcements this morning, we're going to have a special faculty tenure ceremony. We have a number of guests with us this morning, members of the families of our faculty members. You're most welcome here. We're glad you're here. We're going to have a few announcements. We'll say our pledge, and then we'll be seated again for that ceremony. Everyone's invited to the music department recital in Puckett Auditorium at 5 p.m. this afternoon. That's Puckett, 5 p.m., music department recital. Also, everyone's invited to Adeline Vaughn and Tyler Sexton's Barrier recital at 7:30 tonight in Puckett Auditorium. So that's 7:30 tonight in Puckett Auditorium. All right, another announcement about some student activities. If you're interested in serving as a senator for your class, sophomore, junior, or senior, based on your academic level for the fall of 2021, applications are now available in the Dean of Students office. So that's for the senator for your class. The deadline for submitting an application is 9 a.m. this Friday. There'll be a mandatory meeting of all candidates immediately following chapel on Friday. All right, so let's stand now for our pledge and then be seated.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Ladies and gentlemen, the awarding of tenure to a faculty member at Florida College represents a mutual commitment of the faculty member to the mission and ideals of the college, as well as the college's commitment to the faculty member. Granting tenure allows for a reflection on the importance of our faculty to this institution. Florida College has been blessed in many material ways by the students who come to study and grow here and by our dedicated staff and administrative personnel. However, our faculty members are the heart and soul of the college. They bear responsibility for teaching and advising, while they have a vital bearing on the growth of our students even beyond the classroom here. Our tenured faculty members are seated here at the front of the auditorium to help to welcome and to honor 4 professors who will join their ranks today. At this time, our tenure faculty here will be presented, and I'll ask them all now to stand and to face the audience as we honor them with their applause. Colleagues, will you please stand and be honored? Let's welcome them. The college's tenure policy allows a faculty member to apply for tenure in the 6th year of their employment here by submitting a portfolio which provides examples of excellence in teaching, continued professional growth, appropriate academic credentials, and service to the college. This material is reviewed by the Tenure and Promotion Committee, and a recommendation is made by the committee to the academic dean of the college, and then following this review, the dean provides a recommendation to the president of the college. Given the president's approval, tenure is granted on behalf of the board of directors. Thus, today, we honor 4 professors, Mr. Mike Benson, Dr. Brian Gilliam, Dr. Mingwei Liu, and Mr. Austin Parramore, whom have all been granted tenure by President Payne. It's been granted, gentlemen. I will offer a few comments about each man individually and then welcome each to the stage to receive a formal recognition of the conferral of tenure, which I hold in these envelopes here. So first, Mr. Mike Benson. Mr. Mike Benson's extensive career in education has spanned his roles, and they're very diverse. As diverse as a 4th grade school teacher to assistant principal of a large public elementary school to assistant principal at a private elementary school. During this time, he was instrumental in the addition of new bachelor's degrees of science here at Florida College, serving as a co-chair of the education department since 2017, and establishing partnerships with local elementary schools for student internships. Many of you are involved in those now. Because of these achievements and these contributions, the Tenure and Evaluation Committee unanimously recommended that tenure be granted to Mr. Benson. They observed that he consistently finished among the top-rated lecturing professors by receiving student evaluations that were among the highest of the faculty. Another indicator of his impact is the number of coins, 12 and counting, that have been bequeathed on him at the legacy ceremony. For these reasons and more, I'm pleased to formally acknowledge the conferral of tenure upon Mr. Mike Benson. Will you please join me in honoring him with applause as he comes forward to receive his award? Congratulations. Well done. Have a seat. Dr. Brian Gilliam. Dr. Gilliam's extensive career in business has spanned businesses as diverse as Walt Disney Company, Hughes Aircraft Company, Vulcan Materials, that's a concrete and asphalt company for those of you who don't know, and the Anaheim Union High School District. That's a breathtaking breadth of career. He's brought this rich experience to Florida College, and he came in 2015. He served with distinction since then, most recently obtaining his doctorate from the University of South Florida and being appointed as the chair of the business department. Because of his achievement and commitment to Florida College, the Tenure and Evaluation Committee unanimously recommended tenure be granted to Dr. Gilliam, observing that he has consistently received student evaluations above the faculty average and has been awarded 17 coins at the legacy ceremony. For these reasons and more, I'm pleased to formally acknowledge the conferral of tenure upon Dr. Brian Gilliam. Will you please join me in honoring him with applause as he comes to receive his award? Congratulations, sir. Well done. My honor. Dr. Mingwei Liu, also known as the Chinese chess machine. Dr. Liu has had extensive global experience in computer science and math, and it began in China and moved to the Philippines and continued with graduate research appointments at the National University of Singapore. And he has had a number of internationally authored articles on such things as knot theory and differential equations, whatever that is. Because of his, I have some idea, but not much. Because of his growth as a faculty member and his service to Florida College, the Tenure and Evaluation Committee unanimously recommended tenure be granted to Dr. Liu, observing that he continues to work as a scholar and is among the top teachers at Florida College. For these reasons and more, I'm pleased to formally acknowledge the conferral of tenure upon Dr. Mingwei Liu. Will you please join me in honoring him with applause as he comes forward? Congratulations, sir. I honor you. Have a good Last but certainly not least, Mr. Austin Parramore. His diverse experience in sports management began in his graduate work and continued to his leadership of intramural sports at Florida College and his basketball coaching at both the high school and the collegiate levels. His development of the curriculum in sports management has shaped the degree track at Florida College, with courses ranging from sports and American society to pickleball. There's a lot of others there, too. Because of his success over his time with the college and his commitment to the school, the Tenure and Evaluation Committee unanimously recommended tenure be granted to Mr. Parramore, observing that he has carried the lion's share of the college's mission to train the physical dimension of the whole person and is both respected by and relatable to the students. For these reasons and more, I'm pleased to formally acknowledge the conferral of tenure upon Mr. Austin Parramore. You please join me in honoring him. Congratulations. Thank you. Well done. Appreciate it. Very good. All right. In a moment, I'm going to lead a recessional. We're going to leave with these 4 newly tenured faculty members following me. Now, as we depart, we'll be followed by the other tenured faculty members here on the front. And after that, you'll all be dismissed from our assembly this morning. So before that, our tenured faculty on the stage and on the front row, please stand and join me in honoring them one more time and expressing our appreciation. All right, students. Now, if the students will please stand for the recessional, the faculty will exit down the center aisle following me. Again, once the entire faculty has exited the auditorium, students will be dismissed. Gentlemen, you follow me?